Hi, Deacon Ed McCormick here, and I just finished preaching, and I wanted to share with you a brief sketch of the message I had for the people today. It comes from the letter of St. James, where he calls us to be hearers and doers of the word, or hearers of the gospel and doers of the gospel. Now, James is challenging us to be doers of the gospel because he knows that there are lots of Christians who hear the gospel but then do not put it into practice in the way they treat family and friends and colleagues, and especially the poor and the needy. At the same time, James is aware that there are lots of us who engage in all kinds of activities. We have our many to-do lists that have to get done, but those actions are often not informed and shaped by the gospel. And so he wants to pull these two together. He thinks that the authentic Christian is someone who hears the gospel in their heart, in their minds, and lives it, does it. So what he's getting at here is that to live the authentic Christian life requires a new kind of hearing. Not the kind of hearing that a doctor engages in, who is standing there dispassionately listening to your symptoms. No, the kind of hearing that the gospel calls for is the kind that a little child engages in as his mother or father speaks loving words to them. It's the kind of hearing that we do when we hear someone we really care about speak kind and tender words to us. This is a hearing in which those words penetrate us. They touch our hearts and minds and change us. So it's a new kind of hearing. You see, to hear the gospel is to allow Christ and the Spirit to come into your life and to change how you relate to yourself and to everyone. To hear the gospel is to experience it. That's the kind of hearing James wants from us. It's a kind of hearing in which we experience what we hear. It means hearing the gospel and experiencing Christ's freedom from all those forces of hostility and hate and anger that rupture our relationships. It means hearing his word of forgiveness for the times that we have hurt other people. It means hearing that word of the gospel that is healing our hearts and minds and relationships and the world. So that to hear the gospel is to be healed by it, because that's what Christ is doing. He is our peace, St. Paul says. He's knocking down the walls of the divisions among us. He is defeating the forces of hostility and creating a new kind of humanity. And so to hear the gospel is to hear us being summoned to be freed from those forces of hostility, to experience the healing of Christ, the peace of Christ. But here's the other side of this. Because James wants us to be hearers and doers of the gospel. And this requires a new kind of doing, a new way of acting. We all have so many things to do, and we often either avoid them or try to do as many as we can. But the gospel calls for another way of acting that is informed by the gospel, that is empowered by the Spirit. And so a very interesting question to ask as you look at the many things you have to do in your day is, Lord, what do you want me to do today? How do you want me to be about my day? And so this new kind of doing means that we act in a way that cooperates with God's will. We act in a way that continues what God has begun in Christ and the Spirit. That is, we act to free people from the forces of hostility and injustice. We continue the work of Christ by being about the healing of people and the healing of our world, the healing of friendships and family and relationships. We continue Christ's gospel of peace by being peacemakers. So the real task for us is to hear the gospel so that we experience it in such a way that we are compelled to do it, to share it with others. Now, the last point here that makes this way of doing the gospel unique is privileging the poor, the vulnerable, the needy. What James says is that real religion is concerned with caring for the widow and the orphan, the two most vulnerable and desperate populations in the ancient world. And so to do the gospel is to privilege the homeless and the hopeless, the lost and the lonely. It means to put first the immigrant, those who suffer from racism and injustice. It means welcoming those who helped our country, the Afghans who helped our country, reaching out to the people in Haiti. So my friends, I pray that you are filled with the Spirit of God so that you hear the power of the gospel, the fullness of the gospel in such a way that you experience it and are moved to do it.